In November 2004, an event occurred in the sky over the Pacific Ocean that does not fit within the laws of modern aviation. At first glance, it was an ordinary day, one of dozens of days when the United States Navy conducts routine exercises off the coast of California. In this part of the Pacific, such operations are not uncommon. Coordination between ships, carrier-based aviation, pilot performance under high workload, and complex scenarios, where every mistake can be costly, are regularly practiced here. The carrier strike group led by USS Nimitz was operating under normal conditions. This was not an emergency, not a combat mission. There was no bad weather, no signs of a real threat. Everything looked exactly as it should in a well-organized military system, predictable, calm, and under control. And that is exactly what makes this story especially important. Because when something strange happens in chaos, it can be attributed to overload, fatigue, misperception, or stress. But when the strange appears inside a perfectly calibrated environment, where everything is built on calculation, verification, and discipline, it carries a completely different weight. The first place where the anomaly was noticed was the missile cruiser USS Princeton. On board was one of the most advanced radar systems of its time. Systems like these don't just see objects. They track altitude, speed, direction, behavioral patterns, and compare all of this with known models. For operators, this is not a collection of abstract dots on a screen. It is a structured picture of airspace where almost everything can be identified. And within this picture, objects began to appear that behaved abnormally. At first, it looked like a technical irregularity. Individual targets appeared at an altitude of about 20 kilometers. For comparison, this is significantly higher than the typical operating range of many aircraft involved in such exercises. But even more unusual than their altitude was their subsequent movement. Within seconds, these targets descended almost to sea level. They did not dive. They did not follow an arc. They did not descend gradually. They simply appeared at a lower altitude so quickly that conventional motion logic stopped making sense. For any known aircraft, such a maneuver would involve enormous stress. It would require extreme acceleration, unimaginable G-forces, and a massive thermal signature. But operators observed nothing that confirmed such mechanics. There was no normal trajectory, no acceleration phase, no signs of engine operation that usually accompany such rapid altitude changes. The first reaction was rational, a malfunction. This word explains a lot in the world of high technology, especially in military electronics, which are constantly updated, recalibrated, and operating in complex environments. Any operator, engineer, or system specialist would think this first, because it is the safest, most logical, and most professional explanation. But then something happened that began to undermine that version. The targets did not disappear. They continued to appear again and again, not once, not as a random anomaly, but regularly, day after day, with nearly identical behavioral patterns, as if this was not an error, but a repeatable model. And it was precisely this repeatability that became the concerning factor. In a military environment, a single glitch can be ignored. But if a system shows the same thing repeatedly, the issue stops being technical. It becomes operational. In other words, someone had to verify what exactly was in the air. And at some point, that decision was made. 2 FA-18 Super Hornets were launched from the aircraft carrier. This was no longer just observation from a ship. It was a transition to visual contact. If radar detects something unknown, the pilot's task is to approach, assess, identify, track, and, if possible, classify it. Among those who took off was Squadron Commander David Fravor, an experienced pilot with thousands of flight hours. A man who had seen enough to understand the difference between an optical illusion, an unusual maneuver, and something truly anomalous. When the pilots reached the designated area, the first thing that caught their attention was not in the sky. It was the water. The ocean below looked as if intense movement was happening beneath the surface. Not normal waves, not light reflection, not random ripples. It resembled a turbulence zone caused by something large beneath the water, as if a massive object was hidden below, disturbing the surface. Some described it as an area of boiling water, not literally, but visually indicating strong movement. And above this area, they saw the object, white, smooth, elongated. No wings, no tail, no engines, no exhausts, no propellers, no protruding elements that would normally help the eye instantly classify an aircraft. Its shape was so simple that it made it even more unusual. Later, because of this appearance, it received the unofficial name Tic Tac. At this point, it is important to understand one thing. Military pilots are not prone to exaggeration. Their profession is built on restraint. They are used to complex systems, unusual situations, rapid decision-making, and separating facts from impressions. So, when an experienced pilot says something looked unusual, it is not an emotional judgment. It is a technical inconsistency. But the most unusual part was not the shape. It was the movement. The object did not behave like an airplane, not like a helicopter, not like a drone in the conventional sense. Its motion lacked something that is almost intuitive in aviation: inertia. Any craft, no matter how advanced, follows transitions. It accelerates, it slows down, it banks, it compensates for mass. Even the fastest technology does not vanish from one point and appear in another without a physically understandable transition. Here, the pilots observed something different. The object could hover, then abruptly change direction, then accelerate as if there was no real distance between two positions. It did not seem to travel through space. It felt as though it simply changed its position within it. Fravor began descending and attempted to approach. This was a logical step. With visual contact, a pilot tries to reduce distance, estimate size, understand movement geometry, and observe structural details. But at that moment, the object seemed to react to his intention, not just changing position, but behaving as if it was tracking the fighter jet. This was one of the most unusual moments in the entire story. According to the pilots, the object appeared to mirror the aircraft's maneuver. It maintained distance, stayed within view, but did not allow closer approach. For a few seconds, it almost looked like interaction. Not attack, not escape, but a response. As if a brief, strange, silent exchange of actions occurred between the pilot and the object. And then it ended as suddenly as it began. The object disappeared. It is important to understand that the word disappeared can sound too simple. It might suggest the object slowly faded from view. But that is not what happened. It did not become a small dot on the horizon. It did not move behind clouds. It did not leave the line of sight. According to the pilots, it simply was no longer there where it had been a second before. And then something even more unusual happened. Almost immediately after disappearing, the object was detected at another location. the designated rendezvous point, the same location the aircraft were supposed to return to. The distance between these points was tens of kilometers, the time mere seconds. In aviation terms, this behavior did not look normal in any sense. Later, radar data confirmed that the movement had indeed occurred. This was no longer just a pilot's visual impression, not a single-person error, not coincidence. It was a case where visual observation and instrumental data supported each other. And from this moment, the Nimitz case became special because it combines multiple types of evidence: testimony from experienced pilots, radar data, close-range visual description, documented unusual behavior, and no conventional explanation within known aviation technology of that time. For a long time, this story remained largely unknown, which is also natural. Within military systems, countless incidents are recorded, documented, discussed among specialists, and then archived. Not because they necessarily hide something sensational, but because military structures are not inclined to publicize cases without clear answers. But this case did not disappear. It remained in the memory of those who experienced it. And years later, it began to re-emerge in a different context, as part of the broader discussion of unidentified aerial phenomena. In 2017, the New York Times published an article that brought this story into the public domain. It was one of those moments when a topic that had long existed on the periphery of official discourse suddenly gained a serious platform. This was no longer about rumors, pop culture, or amateur accounts. It was about military observations, pilots, Pentagon systems, and cases that were genuinely analyzed within government structures. Following that, videos recorded by aircraft systems were discussed. Black and white infrared footage appeared restrained, almost dry. But that restraint was precisely its strength. There was nothing cinematic about it, no special effects, just an object captured by military systems and pilot communications, where you hear not panic, but professional surprise. In 2020, the U.S. Department of Defense officially confirmed the authenticity of several such videos. This was a significant turning point, not because the government said, "We know what this is," but because it acknowledged, "These recordings are real." That confirmed three key points. First, the videos are not fake. Second, they were recorded by military systems. Third, they show real objects whose origin was not publicly explained at the time. And this is where the story becomes truly complex, because confirming authenticity is not the same as explaining the phenomenon. The official position remained cautious, which is understandable. Any serious system avoids making final conclusions without complete data, especially when it concerns airspace, defense, technology, and the risks of misinterpretation. But for the public, that was already enough to begin a new stage of discussion. The question was no longer, do such observations exist? The question became, what exactly did the pilots see? And why did these objects behave as if they were not bound by known limitations? Some researchers suggested sensor distortions. Others pointed to complex atmospheric effects. Some proposed secret technological developments unknown to the public. Each theory had strengths and weaknesses, but none of them explained all aspects at once. That is what makes the Nimitz case so persistent. It is inconvenient, not because it proves something extraordinary, but because it does not fit into a simple model. If it is instrument error, Why are there visual observations? If it is optical illusion, why does radar confirm it? If it is known technology, why does it appear unusual even to military experts? If it is secret development, why demonstrate it during active exercises across multiple observation platforms? Each answer creates a new question, and perhaps that is why this case still holds its weight. Because at its core is not sensation, but inconsistency. Modern aviation is a world where almost everything is measured: speed, altitude, G-force, range, trajectory, reflectivity, thermal signature. It is a world of numbers, not myths. And when within this system something appears that cannot be translated into familiar physics and engineering, a rare state emerges. Not fear, but intellectual tension. Something was recorded. Something was seen. Something displayed controlled movement. And that was enough for the 2004 case to remain one of the most compelling and unusual episodes in modern UAP history. But perhaps the strongest part of this story is not the object itself. It is the tone of those who describe it. When you listen to pilots, operators, military specialists, you rarely hear a desire to impress. What you hear instead is an attempt to be precise, not to exaggerate, not to distort, not to add anything unnecessary, just to preserve the fact in its pure form and present it as honestly as possible. And that is what creates authenticity. Because authenticity in such cases is not born from loud statements, but from restraint. Not from certainty that we know the answer, but from the honest acknowledgement that there is no answer yet. And perhaps that is the most mature position in this entire topic. Not to rush turning the unknown into legend, but also not to hide it simply because it has no name yet. The Nimitz case remains open not because there is too little data, but because there is enough data to recognize the problem, yet not enough to close it completely. And it is at such points that real investigation begins. Not when everything is already understood, but when observation becomes stronger than the existing model of the world.